Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Boy, it quiets down quickly. Everyone's excited for this event, as I am. Good morning. I'm Peter Rothstein. I'm the president of NECEC, the Northeast Clean Energy Council. Really pleased to be here and to be welcoming you, be the first to welcome you, but there'll be several of our colleagues and friends and collaborators coming up in just a moment. This is one of NECEC's Emerging Trends Series events. We do these every couple months on a wide range of topics that are relevant for what's going on across clean energy. This one's a little bit different because it's also drawing in some themes from another sector. We're going to be talking about that in just a moment. But I'm really pleased to be able to welcome you here and to be able to say a quick word of thanks, both to the Mass Clean Energy Center, who's our sponsor in this event today, as well as several others on the convergence themes, as well as to our host and friends at Google, who are clearly hosting us today, but also are some of the folks who are most in the middle of a lot of these themes, including some of the things we're going to be talking about today. So I actually, although it says on the screen Steve Pike from MassCEC, and Steve is on the way, but the traffic, at least on his commute, is pretty terrible today. So he's going to be joining us a bit late, but I'm very pleased to be able to instead ask Galen Nelson, who's part of the senior team at MassCEC, to come up and say a few words on behalf of MassCEC. So Galen, come on up.
Thanks, Peter. Thank you. Steve probably could have used leverage some AI to get here faster and with less carbon. But hopefully he'll show up at some point. So thank you, Peter, and thank you, NECEC. We are really excited about this series focused on the convergence of clean energy and other high-tech sectors and trends. I also want to thank Google for hosting us. It's a wonderful space here. We decided to launch this series because we knew that increasingly clean energy and other high-tech sectors and trends are converging, and we wanted to be ahead of that curve. So I'm going to be very, very brief. Just quick background on MassCEC, and then a couple notes on why we're excited about this particular intersection. For those of you who aren't familiar with the Mass Clean Energy Center, we are responsible for growing the clean energy economy here in the Commonwealth, and we do that in a number of different ways. We provide incentives for commercially viable clean energy technologies. We make investments in emerging clean energy startups, both actual investments. We take equity positions in companies. We also provide grants on a competitive basis to a wide range of companies working in a number of different sectors within clean energy to help fill and address widely recognized funding and other gaps in the marketplace. And we also support workforce training to help grow the clean energy industry here in the state. We also own and operate a couple of unique facilities. One, the nation's largest indoor wind blade test facility, which is really an amazing facility right here across the river in Charlestown in Boston, and the New Bedford Marine Commerce Terminal, which is a purpose-built facility to serve as a staging ground for the development of our emerging offshore wind industry here in Massachusetts. So again, very briefly, in a nutshell, the reason why we care about this space is that increasingly distributed energy resources, whether they be solar farms, solar panels on your home, wind farms, electric vehicles, electric vehicle charging infrastructure, smart thermostats, smart appliances, and increasingly smart buildings are, of course, consuming and in some cases producing electrons, clean and otherwise, but increasingly they're also producing mountains of data. And that data is flowing in a number of different directions. And there are companies, really exciting companies, working at the intersection and innovating at the intersection of these two sectors, clean energy and artificial intelligence, that are learning how to unlock new value streams and benefits for consumers, for utilities, for grid operators, for project and asset owners by analyzing this data. So we're really excited about that emerging opportunity. We're also excited that Massachusetts is not only a leader in clean energy, but obviously a leader in IT generally and AI specifically. So we think that this innovation in this space and developing new companies that are extracting and unlocking new value for all of those stakeholders create a new and exciting economic development opportunity for the Commonwealth. So for all these reasons, we're very excited about this space. And in fact, that is why we have supported at least 5 companies, some of whom you'll be hearing from today, in this space, the intersection between clean energy and artificial intelligence, including Raptor Maps, Multi-Sensor Scientific, Windesco, New Grid, and TagUp. So I will end there. You're going to hear a lot more about this space from our panelists, and I believe you'll also be hearing some quick pitches, if you will, from some relevant companies later on. But again, thank you for coming this morning. Thank you to Google for hosting. We're really excited to partner with NEC on these series and look for future series examining the convergence of clean energy in other sectors going forward. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Alistair Pym. Thank you.
Well, good morning, everyone. My name's Alistair Pym. I'm the VP of Innovation and Partnerships at NECEC, and I've worked to build up this event. So really pleased to see you all here today. Part of the idea was to really cross-pollinate between the IT sector and the Cleantech sector. So it'd just be good to have a show of hands. Who would say they're in the clean energy sector or the energy sector? Pretty much everyone. So what about people in the IT world? Okay, and then what about people working at the intersection? Ah, there you go. Okay, so I guess it worked, Galen, right? That's good news. All right. Well, I've actually worked a bit on this intersection as well through my career, but I hadn't done a lot with AI. So I did a bit of reading, and I learned a lot while researching for this event. One thing I came across was that the term AI was actually coined at Dartmouth College up in New Hampshire back in 1956 at a conference that included people from MIT, Carnegie Mellon, Stanford, and Edinburgh. And I also learned that Google is a real leader in this field. And then as Galen said, we're here in Boston and Massachusetts in the Northeast, which is a real leader in the development of clean tech. Not just the technology side, but also the policy side as well. So it's a really great place to be experimenting with new things as they emerge. So I think it's only fitting that we're here today at Google, across the road from MIT, and at the heart of the clean tech innovation world to talk about how AI is impacting clean tech. So with that, I think I'd like to introduce Liz Schwab, who is our host today. And she's head of external affairs at Google here in Cambridge in the Northeast. But she's just going to say a few words about what Google is doing.
Thank you. Good morning. Yeah, it struck me as you were listing those universities, we have offices adjacent to all of them, which is probably pretty telling of, Stanford, MIT, Carnegie Mellon. I'm like, yep. So good morning. Thank you for coming today. It's probably no surprise, and you might be familiar that Google is heavily invested in artificial intelligence. Our CEO talks both internally and externally about how we are an AI-first company. He has been quoted as saying that he thinks AI will be more transformative on industries and humankind than fire or electricity. Those are some bold statements, right? It's pretty bold. Fire, really? But even if 50 years from now we look back and that is hyperbole, it's clear that industry has woken up to the power and the potential of AI. You see it every day in consumer products. It's what Google Maps tells Steve that his commute is going to be terrible today. So at least you know how much pain you're about to endure. Hopefully it does save you time too. It's what allows me to search on my phone in my photo archive to find pictures of one of my kids at the beach 2 years ago. Amidst thousands of pictures, I can just type in his name and beach, and I get 4 pictures back. which is pretty powerful, right? But beyond the consumer-facing stuff, we use it really intensely across internal processes as well. I won't go into too much detail because I don't want to steal my colleague's thunder who will sit on the panel and talk about this more, but we employ AI across our data centers to increase our energy efficiency. You might not be aware, Google is actually the largest corporate purchaser of renewable energy in the world by actually a pretty fair margin. And so it's really critical to our business that we can employ AI to make that energy use efficient. I think it's also clear that technologists believe that we're just scratching the surface of what AI can do for society. It can help detect heart attacks. It can help doctors find cancer tumors. It can help protect crops from environmental stresses. It can help us explore the solar system. There's incredible uses that we probably haven't even thought of yet. But I was talking to Alistair before this. As a human who lives on this planet, as a mother, I'm really hopeful that clean tech is one of those industries that leads the way here. Because I think there's a huge need that I don't have to preach to the choir about here today, but I'm rooting for you. So thanks again to NECEC. I'll hand it back to Alistair to get the panel started.
Thank you, Liz. So, yeah, if the panel could now come up, I think we've got a slide which says who everyone is. So, here we go. So, I'd like to welcome up Yuri Mariash, who is Field Sales Executive at Google, helping big corporations transform their business with AI. We've got, I'll do it in the order on the slide, okay? So, Eddie Abrupta, CTO and co-founder of Raptor Maps, who's doing some very cool things with drones that Eddie will tell us about. Pavel Azogin from National Grid, where he's the Director of Data Science. And Emily Phillips, who's a lately announced speaker, who's leading the data science team at Sense. So with that, I will grab my seat and we'll go from here. So, is that working? Great, cool. I've in part of my studies preparing for this, I try to figure out what AI is, and it's one definition I came up with was that it's software that's better than humans at handling complex tasks at speed. So clearly, with what's going on in the grid, as Galen alluded to, with the advent of solar and wind and EVs, things are getting much more dynamic and much more complex. So part of this vision is really what can AI do to help us manage that increasing complexity and unleash better things for us here. So I thought it'd be interesting to hear what is the definition that our panelists think about when they hear the word AI. I know it's a bit confusing for me. There's machine learning, there's AI. So what does it all mean? So perhaps we'll just go down quickly and give everyone an opportunity to just introduce themselves a bit more and answer that question at the same time. Okay, so starting with you, Yuri.
Yeah, sure. And thank you guys for showing up today. I think it's a very important field for Google and me personally. So I work for Google Cloud. I joined about 1.5 years ago. So I work with customers in the Boston area around their needs from Google Cloud and specifically around how machine learning can help them transform their business. And we do see a lot of machine learning applications across IT. We see that a lot in call center automation, predictive maintenance, and it's also applicable to many fields in clean tech. I think to your question specifically on what is the difference between AI and ML, and I'm sure everybody has a different take on that. To me, AI is a definition of the entire field of where we have computers and we have neural networks that are able to make decisions based on data. And I try to stay away from AI because it also is a big buzzword where people think that here's a giant robot that is gonna kill everybody because it's so sophisticated. And I talk about ML, which is a very, in my mind, a narrower subset of AI, is how do we train a computer to do a task that is very repetitive in a way that could outperform a human being, comparing two images or making decisions based on multiple sources of data in a way that is cheaper and faster and better than a person would do sitting in front of a computer or data set and so forth. So that's what I focus when I talk to customers and people who are interested in AI, is more around machine learning. But curious to see what other people have to say.
Sure, absolutely. We get that question quite a bit. Machine learning, where does it become AI? So my name is Eddie Abrupta. I'm the CTO at Raptor Maps. I started the company around 2015. My educational background is actually aerospace. So I'm an aerospace engineer, I guess you would say, undergrad and graduate work, more on space than aviation, but a lot of the education. Two was about human-machine interaction. When you fly in an airplane, there's quite a bit of automation that happens, but there is still a pilot up front that you feel you can trust that's going to do well and try to land the plane successfully. So this idea of where does computers and automation, the human fit in, how do they all trust each other, is a very familiar topic to me. And it's been really exciting at Raptor Maps to be a part of developing some of that technology, using things that are in existence, but then also pushing the boundaries on what we can do with data science, image recognition. So yeah, I think talking a little bit about what I think. So certainly, I mean, following Yuri up from Google, they kind of help set the definitions. But I kind of feel similarly that the machine learning, the data science approach, how does Raptor Maps take 30,000 images and determine which ones have issues of solar modules, that for us is machine learning. And where we get into the thoughts about AI, I can only speak, that's where we start thinking about kind of decision support systems. So, okay, given that you looked at all these images and you have found where all the issues are, what business decision do I need to make? And typically a person would make that decision and say, well, based off how much money we make or whatever, I believe we should send somebody out and fix these issues. And where we're starting to actually incorporate artificial intelligence is helping supporting those decision making. At first, maybe offering some suggestions, maybe eventually making the decision and causing action. But that for us is kind of the boundary, is when we start actually applying action into the world. But I would say that's how we do it at Raptor Maps, I would say.
That's great. Thanks, Eddie. How about your view, Pavel?
Yeah, I'm going to answer the question first and then give a quick introduction. So I would definitely agree with two previous speakers. The way that we talk about AI and ML as a subset of AI is really right now for us is helping humans making better data-driven decisions, not always replacing them. And this is definitely when we're kind of progressing as descriptive and then into predictive and prescriptive analytics. This is when we will start this conversation even more deeper. But typically, it's really help us to shift from decisions making based on prior experiences and gut into something that is really data-driven. And this is where machine learning really helps a lot. So I'm Pavel Ashogin. I lead a data science team at National Grid. We are part of a larger advanced analytics group that is solving companies' challenges through data and analytics. We're basically a go-to team for anything that has to do with forecasting, predictive modeling, simulations, optimizations, you name it. If you're not very familiar with National Grid, we're a utility company here in Northeast. We serve about 20 million people in New York, Massachusetts, and Rhode Island. We operate a network that consists of over 100,000 miles of pipes and wires, and we use this network to deliver gas and electricity to our customers efficiently, reliably, and most importantly, safely. For our team, we definitely have various purposes for AI and ML as a subset of it. For example, we forecast electric outages when they're going to happen during big storms. And we use this information to pre-position crews there closer to those outages so that we can restore power to our customers faster. We also work on electric and gas loads forecast and growth opportunities for the company. We're pretty closely tied with all the regulatory initiatives that have to do with new ways of and new policies. So I'm talking about the reforming energy vision in New York, power sector transformation in Rhode Island, and of course grid mod here in Massachusetts. I also wanted to say that as a company, National Grid, we're really big on clean energy and clean tech. If you haven't read it already, there has been a paper published a couple months ago called Pathway to 80 by 50, which is our blueprint on how to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 80% from 1990 levels by year 2050. And it really focuses on three key areas, which is the heating, transportation, and the power generation. So we're very serious about clean energy, and I'm very happy to be here. Thank you.
Thanks, Pavel.
So I'm Emily. I'm a data scientist at Sense. Sense is a startup. We started in 2013, and it's a sort of like a fitness tracker for your house. It's a device that goes in your circuit breaker panel, uses AI to figure out what appliances are running, when they're running, and how much energy they're using. I've been at Sense for 2 years. Before that, I was at iRobot doing robotics, and I got interested in moving to Sense because I have an interest in the outdoors and had seen what the climate change is doing and thought that this was a place I could use my AI experience to make a difference. So then, as for AI versus machine learning, so to me, AI is anything where we're trying to get a computer to do something that we don't know how to do ourselves. And there's many different techniques. Machine learning is then using statistics on large data sets to answer questions that we have. And I tend towards the machine learning end because it's less buzzwordy and we know how well we've measured things and is it accurate.
That's great. So I think we've got sort of general consensus there on the definition, but definitely a few differences too. That's always healthy. So you've talked a little bit about how you're using AI in Cleantech, and I want to come back to that later, but you've also all had sort of varied careers and certainly have examples of where AI is being used in other places. So I look at AI as being adopted in other sectors first, and sort of energy lagging that. Things like finance and marketing and healthcare specifically, or maybe other places. But maybe Yuri, you're the one with the sort of broadest experience here. Maybe you could talk about some other places where it's happening, which might give us a feel for where it could go with energy as well.
Yeah, so I'm happy to talk about that and maybe kind of walk you through what we're seeing outside of Cleantech, and then give you an example of a company who's in the intersection in my mind in many ways. So one of our customers is Iron Mountain. So Iron Mountain is the biggest record manager in the world. So they store the world's paper. And the project we did with them, it's a big partnership that they have with Google, and they just recently launched, is, they have dark data. Essentially, they're storing records for their customers, and they're putting them in boxes, and they drive the boxes to huge warehouses. But data is not new. I know we're generating a lot of data, but we've been generating data for years. So how do you harness the power of AI, basically take that paper out of the box, scan it, and then apply AI to classify the information you have there, and then actually use it to drive insights? One example could be, if you're drilling a well and you want to produce, gas or oil, based on your past experience that is on record, which grout you should use specifically because of the geological conditions in the area you're exploring. And that applies to other things like, the mortgage industry. If you have multiple mortgage applications, but some of them are incomplete, instead of contacting the customer, AI can help you find the missing information of that specific customer or individual who applied for a mortgage in other records. But the interesting thing is that we see that being used now outside of the traditional IT record management in Cleantech. So another example is Wind Power Lab. And what they essentially do is predictive maintenance for offshore wind turbines. So I know we don't have, or maybe we have some for offshore turbines in the US, but they're big in Europe. And if you think about it, it all comes down to, it's a very expensive asset. It's very difficult to maintain. You have to send ships and crews outside. They have to climb the turbine to see if there's a problem with the blade, replace it, or try to fix it. And typically what would happen if they would send out ships with experts, then they started taking images and kind of review those offline. What they found out is that they trained a neural network on Google Cloud. And what it helps them to do is it actually provides better accuracy to predictively identify hairline fractures on the blade, so that they know when to send the crew out and address that specific issue. And it's a big deal because the turbines are very expensive, and it's a huge asset for the operator. But also, if you think about it, weather is not always great, and there are periods like over the winter they can't even do that. So if they can predictively understand which turbines should be replaced or maintained actively, they can have the turbine running for longer. They don't have to shut it down, which is great for everybody. We're generating more energy for a longer period of time.
That's great. Thanks, Yuri. Eddie, how about you? You're in Raptor Maps now, but maybe some experiences from your past in other places.
Sure, yeah. So I mean, just I guess as a consumer out there, how many times have you hit a chat bot on a customer support website? I feel like there's quite a bit of AI being used in this telecommunication, customer support area that I bump into quite frequently, and sometimes you can get help or get a question answered faster than if you're trying to call on the phone, which I think is pretty interesting. Also in games quite a bit. So before Raptor Maps, a while ago, I started a video game publishing company essentially, and we made a game, launched on the App Store, and you would program these bots that would basically run around, do tower defense, and try to you basically try to beat them, and that was basically essentially some bit of artificial intelligence. Those bots kind of looked exactly like your player, so you almost couldn't tell them apart. So I feel like gaming has really led a lot of the AI initiatives forward, and now you're seeing things like even with Google, or how a computer can, chess, sure, yeah, we can mathematically figure that out, but things like Go, where you now have AI playing AI to get better, that's starting to get pretty interesting. So I think those are some of the areas that I see almost every day it being used.
Paolo, Emily, any other thoughts?
Yeah, I'm going to cheat a little bit and talk about the utility example, but in a call center setting. So one of the utilities on the south has implemented the system where when people call in the contact center, the AI figures out where they're calling with a pretty high level of accuracy, and this way they can reroute their call tree so that the top reason why they're calling is going to be number one, instead of you listening for all the options. And then ideally even eliminate the communication with the human so that you can resolve your issue directly through the phone. So I think this is pretty powerful because it really hits on the customer satisfaction, and you are probably going to be much happier if you're going to resolve your problem faster without having to sit on a phone call waiting for the live operator to open. But also it reduces the call volume to the call center, to the live agents there, which in a utility setting, because we're differently compensated than the competitive world, can actually lead directly to the client bill reduction.
So I guess maybe to some of our fears, but we're going to come back to that one later on about how many jobs are going to go. But before we go there, Emily, maybe you could just share a few insights.
Yeah, so I'll start with robotics. So it used to be that robots had to stay in a factory where it was a very controlled environment. They had pre-programmed motions. And with AI, now we have robots that can go in unstructured environments. You've got vacuum cleaners running around your house. They don't fall off cliffs. They don't terrorize your pets too much. And soon, we're going to have autonomous cars that can drive, and that's going to revolutionize transportation.
So, yeah, I had a Roomba once, right? And it used to chew up my carpet. So is AI going to help that?
In fact, it is. There's a neural network that got trained on some of the more recent Roombas that detects what type of flooring it's on, so it adapts how it's running its bristles and how it's sucking.
But you have to upgrade it.
Yeah.
It's only
Yeah, I think the mechanics gave up a long time ago. All right. Before we get to those, the fears question, I want to go back and think about what else AI could do in the energy space, right? So what I've learned about IT is that because of Moore's law, computing power increases every year or every year and a half by double, right? So, and you've got this other trend of cheaper and cheaper sensors coming out, more pervasive sensors. So yeah, we've got lots of data, but we're going to have a ton more, right? And you're going to have more computing power. So we've seen other industries be transformed because of that, right? So what is the future in your eyes of what AI really could do to help us in the fields you're looking at?
Well, I'll go first and kind of talk a little bit about what Google does and what we're seeing and what I personally think is the future. So, we have things like Project Sunroof, which essentially uses AI and Google Earth imaging to give you a good score of a specific rooftop, no matter what it is, on how much energy production you can get if you put a solar panel on top of it. So I think we're going to see more and more applications where you can kind of understand what the shift would look like for you if you're shifting from traditional power to wind or solar generated power. I also think with the IoT revolution, where we see smart meters everywhere, we can make better decisions in terms of how we manage our grid. And given the U.S. grid is pretty outdated, but we can start upgrading it with small actions and enabling meters to be smarter, so that we can essentially match demand and supply on the power generation side, and us as consumers. I mean, there's so many interesting applications around that.
So I think Liz touched on it as well. Google's done some pretty amazing things in the data center space, right? So I was in the data center industry before, and there was a big drive, kind of the industry trying to be proactive to see how they could reduce energy use in data centers because they have huge fans, lots of power going in. But and Google was the leader back then, sort of 4 or 5 years ago. But I've heard they've done something to really take it up a notch with.
Yeah, we did. So if you think about it, what is a data center? A lot of companies had a data center, but in many cases it would be a closet somewhere with servers. Then okay, if you're a bigger company, then you'll have a dedicated facility, and if you're Google or AWS or Azure, then you'll have a giant facility. And if you think about it, so what is the number one cost of running a data center? So they're not going to build it in New York, where it's the most expensive square footage. They'll build it somewhere where the land is cheap. But the big driver of call center operation is actually the power cost, because you have to run all the equipment in it. So every potential reduction in power consumption translates into huge savings, and it's actually better for the environment. I don't remember what the statistics, but I think like data centers is like, I don't know,
2% of
2%
energy use
of,
worldwide.
it's huge. Like us sending emails or checking Facebook, it has an impact because it's running in a data center somewhere. So what Google did is really looked into how they can optimize the power consumption of a data center. And what they found out is, I don't know, how many of you have been into a real data center? Okay, good. So I don't know if you remember or not, but going in, it's usually very cold inside, right? And the reason why it's cold is because all the servers are generating so much heat, and you want to keep it cool because otherwise you'll have failures and then you'll have to replace some of the equipment. But what Google did, looking into the power consumption, the temperature specifically in the data center, and the failure rate of the different components, they actually realized that they can sustain a much higher temperature than we thought before, in a way that the fail rate is not hugely disastrous for us. It's cheaper for us to replace that specific component than keeping the data center at this freezing temperature where you have to go in and put a coat. So if you go into a data center, a Google data center, you would be surprised how warm it is. It's actually pretty warm. You don't need a coat. You can wear shorts because the equipment can sustain higher temperatures, and even when it fails, it's not a disastrous fail. The fail rate is generally low. So we control that, and then we kind of map that versus the power consumption. So we were able to reduce the cooling so that we use less power, and we're greener, and everybody's happy, hopefully.
Yeah, I think that's a great example where AI can show things which perhaps we might not have thought about, right? So looking at those trade-offs and coming up with maybe counterintuitive solutions. So Eddie, any stories to add to that?
Sure. Yeah. So I mean, I think in clean energy, we were kind of saying a little bit that it seems that clean energy is slow to adopt, but in solar, it's been very quick to adopt. I mean, us as a startup growing in that space, even companies we work with that are operations and maintenance companies, they're adopting technology because in order to compete in that marketplace, you need to be using technology to service things faster, to move to the next site. More solar is getting installed increasingly rapidly. I think it's somewhere between 30 and 40% year over year installed solar. So in order to basically get grid parity almost, you need technology and artificial intelligence to be basically able to maintain these systems faster. So even things that we're doing like through MassCEC and our corporate partner NL Green Power to be able to not do a lot of our analytics in the cloud, but actually do them on the edge right at the solar farm as the drone flies and finds an issue. Those things are just helping speed up the faster we can basically maintain solar, the more we can build. So I think that, and also too, I should mention that with any energy, I think quite a bit of there's soft costs, these kind of business processes. So things we can do to help automate that and decrease those soft costs will let us put more investing into the actual technology that's producing energy. So I'm really looking forward to and pretty excited about how AI, but also just software is helping move the industry faster.
That's great.
I think one of the things that you touched upon, Alistair, was very important is the sensors. So I think one of the things that people don't know about utilities here in Massachusetts or New York and Rhode Island. So when your power goes out, we use the most sophisticated sensor ever to figure out that that happened. It's you calling us. So this is obviously suboptimal if you exactly. And it's not very convenient for you if your power goes out at 2 o'clock and you only let us know at 5. So one of the things that needs to happen to really speed up the AI and machine learning applications in the utility industry is definitely the proliferation of the smart meters. We have a couple pilots, one in New York, one here in Massachusetts and Worcester, where we tested out a lot of those things. But ultimately, every time I read like press releases from other utilities that have smart meters everywhere, I'm so jealous and I want to get that here. Just the ability of figuring out when your power is out, where exactly it is out, eliminate an unnecessary truck roll that's not just gonna, sometimes get your power fixed faster, but also reduce the transportation impact, the greenhouse gases and all those things. So I think we need more sensors.
Yeah, to follow that one up, I read that one of our former members, Opower, which was acquired by Oracle, is doing a lot of work with utilities in places where they do have that data and smart meters.
Absolutely.
And they claimed they'd save 20 terawatt hours of electricity by being able to optimize. So it's pretty impressive.
They do that also in our territory, service territory as well. Even when you don't have the meter, they can do some analytics that compares you to the neighbor based on just your regular meter once a month data. But there's so much more you can do on a more granular level, and I'm assuming Emily will touch up on that because Sense is an awesome smart meter.
Good segue. Yeah.
Yeah, so basically what we are doing is we're taking, you heard about how AI helped the data centers to make so you could have it warmer, use less energy, and find faults. We're bringing the same thing down to the consumer level. So now the consumer can see what's running in their house. We've gotten anecdotal reports of people finding appliances, like there was a instant on-demand hot water heater that wasn't actually hooked up to anything that was a large fraction of their bill, and they never knew before we found it for them. And we also started to look into detecting faults. So we've done some research where we can see that an AC is leaking refrigerant. And so that's someplace where we can tell the user in advance and means that the technician comes out at a more convenient time. It's not a rush. Another study we've done with National Grid is we looked at some of the lower income people who had high bills. And using AI, we were able to figure out that some people were spending up to $100 a month on vampire loads from TVs, computers, DVRs, those things in idle mode. And so this is all the stuff that we can do with more and more data and figuring out how to reduce energy usage at the consumer level and make them happier. We're not making their life worse by telling them to turn everything off and you live in a dark cave.
So it's clear to me that there's a promising future here, right? The more power we get, the more things we can do, and we can make it more efficient and move towards this clean energy future. That's great. But there's a dark side to this, and sort of you touched on that a little bit, Pavel. The more it can do, maybe the more it can replace humans. So, how do you all think about that? Is it going to take over everything we do? Is AI going to rule the world, or how do you see it going?
I can start first, if you don't mind. So I think this is one of my interest, I shouldn't say favorite topics, but this is the topic that we've talked about at length. And the reality of it is that it is not going to do anything like taking your job. What happens is right now, we are, as a utility, and I think the overall kind of energy sector, there is a shortage of qualified people to do qualified jobs. We did a strategic workforce planning project a couple years ago, and we looked at our current demographic situation. And I have never seen such a perfect picture of bimodal distribution anywhere outside of a textbook statistics. It was just and that's what it was. And what this means in reality for us, that we have so many people retiring that we need to fill this pipeline. What AI is going to help us do in machine learning is, first of all, to help us survive this avalanche of people with their institutional knowledge that are retiring, and we don't have that captured in our systems or the processes yet. So we can help with machine learning there. But additionally, what it's going to help us doing, and it's a part of AI that we don't often talk about, that is, I think, unfairly forgotten, is RPA, robotic process automation, that is really doing the mundane tasks that nobody likes doing on a daily basis and taking it away from them so that they can focus on something that is more value added, that is more interesting, that is just more exciting to get to your job site to do every day. So I think this is where the power of it is. It's never going to take away the stuff that you love doing, but it's going to replace so much and make so much more mundane things and make it more easier for you to do your job.
Yeah, and if we can spend less time listening to the options on a call center queue, that'd be great. Thank you. How about you, Emily? What do you see sort of some of the concerns of where the data might go? I mean, if your Sense gadget knows everything you do in your house, is that going to be a problem?
Yeah, so definitely we're very concerned about privacy because, yeah, I look at anonymized data, but I can still look through a house and say, oh, they baked cookies that evening, because you can see when the oven was on. And I forget some of the other good examples, but you can really tell what somebody's doing in their house. So this obviously, we need to be very concerned about privacy. In robotics also, there was a bit where iRobot was considering selling the maps. That's another great example where people don't want maps of their houses being sold on the internet. So I agree that I'm not concerned about AI taking over functions that people did before. The dishwasher was a great invention. Nobody is mad, maybe a few people, that they don't get to wash dishes. And the same thing with all these other advances, but the dishwasher isn't going to share your data on the internet. Whereas with this newer information that goes into the big data that for machine learning, we do have all this data that we have to, as corporations, have to be good stewards of the data and make sure that we're not, that it's secure, anonymous, and only used for what the users want it used for.
Any other thoughts, Yuri or Eddie?
I defer, and that's my personal opinion. I think AI will definitely change the employment landscape. I think it's already changing, radiology, for example. It will automate, it will augment first. I think over time we will see a change in the way people are employed because it will automate the mundane tasks and people are getting paid for doing them today. So I think you can't ignore that. I mean, we have technology that transform, typewriters. So things change and people, learn how to adjust, and hopefully we can be proactive about helping them do that. I think specifically to your question, it will become an interesting question when AI matures, especially, you can talk about the ethics of a self-driving vehicle. Should it make sure that the person in the car is safe or save, 10 people standing in a bus stop? But I think where it will really be important is when we're going to see AI can affect the way our economy runs. So if you imagine 2, 3, 4 years from now where we're actually going to have self-driving vehicles in mass production and being used everywhere, like insurance. So if there's an accident, whose fault is it? Is it the fault of the manufacturer? Is it the fault of the person who is sitting in the car and supposedly supposed to watch over the AI who's driving the vehicle? I think regulation that addresses those areas is complex and it's not easy, but I think it's a challenge for the regulators, and how are we addressing that challenge in a way that is not harming innovation, right? Because I think we all want to keep moving forward and do more things and let AI do a lot of great things, but we want to be sensitive and make educated decisions. So I think it's all about education. It's educating ourselves, it's educating everybody around us, and especially educating people who make decisions and write laws.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a couple. I mean, we really see it in solar as an enabling technology, not really a job-destroying type technology. So for I think a pretty good example is so for in solar inspection. So to be clear, Raptor Maps, we enable people to inspect solar farms using drones and image analysis and such. But just the invention of the drone per se, that took a lot of your trained technicians in the solar farm that would maintain it, turn them into drone pilots. They could fly, inspect, but now instead of actually fixing things on the site, they took all their images to their back office and went through them on their computer. So it was like, okay, great, there's this technology with drones, and that's letting us do things faster, but it actually just transitioned the work into back office work that those people should not be doing that. They need to be out fixing, maintaining, and as we keep installing more and more, we need more of those trained technicians to be able to do that. So converting them into people that look through images and stuff is not the most efficient use of their time. So we really see AI for us as an enabler, not really, not taking jobs, actually creating them as we keep installing solar. But I would say too, and this is getting back to some of my understanding and roots with aviation, is that in human factors, there's this very important concept, and it's actually called the Yerkes-Dodson curve, but that's not really necessary to remember. But essentially, when you have automation or AI, if the human in the loop is very bored, it becomes a vigilance task and you stop paying attention. Where if the human in the loop is overwhelmed with all these alerts, buzzers, and alarms, they get frustrated and they kind of quit. So there's that kind of sweet spot where a human in the loop is very effective. And actually here right in Cambridge is the Volpe Transportation Center. It's right nearby, Department of Transportation. They're a leader in understanding this human factor, supervisory control. How much should the human do while they're watching the AI drive? How do we keep us entertained enough to make sure we do a good job and not just sit back and say, oh yeah, it's got it. So that's where I think
you'd be surprised how many people with Teslas are not actually paying attention on the highway. It's so good. I mean, it's doing a good job, but where do we draw the line?
But is that why in my son's car, he's got a nice new car. I've driven it, and if I start to veer off the lanes, I get a little jolt in the back of the chair. Is that what that's about?
Yeah, keeping you on your toes.
Okay, interesting.
You're right there at the peak of that curve, essentially.
So some interesting things happening, but what I detected there was you started to talk about, okay, there are things which it could do, but we need to be careful, right? You talked about regulations, there's privacy. So one of the things that NECEC does is policy advocacy, right? And it's mostly been directed at, let's get some more clean energy out there. But as we get into some of these issues, is this going to be a place where the high-tech industry has to sort of go for safe rules about privacy and the way data is used? Or do you think this is a combination of the energy industry and the high-tech industry working together to create a better future? So what are your thoughts on that? Pavel, maybe you want to start on that one with...
Sure. So we take privacy and any kind of information extremely seriously, in part not just because of the GDPR. So National Grid has a big presence in the UK, but also every single time we are working with Sense, and there's a pilot going on right now, about 400, I think, Sense monitors in Rhode Island that is serving various different purposes. We're testing a lot of ideas. We're really looking into how this technology and the algorithms behind can help us. Every single time there's any kind of communications, as Emily mentioned, where data is completely anonymized. There has been a lot of concerns when we were put in the Worcester Smart Grid pilot, and I'm sure in Clifton Park in New York it was the same, about how do we make sure that all this data really stays with the customers and only utility, and no one else can access it. And there is a very large legal documents that I cannot read, but they're protecting everybody from this. So I think it is extremely important that we work with both the technology sector and the regulators to figure out what is the solution for this. But I think we all agree that the data can be a solution to so many answers. So we just need to find effective ways of working together.
Yeah, and I think on the other side, my take is that for us to keep on broadening the ramp up of renewable energy, it's helpful for some of the solution providers out there to have more data from the utility, right? So they can say, well, what about putting a solar farm here or a battery storage plant there? Because that actually might give benefits both to the customer and to the utility. So having, there's a fine line to be drawn there about how data can be used. But do you think there are ways to get over that?
And I think the main, for us, the main thing that we do is it has to benefit the customer. So if we can find customers through the propensity modeling that we're doing right now, or through more granular data from Sense, that we can tell you, hey, your refrigerator can be replaced and should be replaced, and here's 150 or 250, whatever dollar rebate it is to do this, and we can target people more efficiently doing this. I think this is a big win for everybody.
It makes sense, yeah. Anyone else got any ideas about policy regulation? Yuri?
I mean, I think it definitely has to be a combination of both. I mean, I know specifically for Google, we do work a lot on making sure that our AI doesn't have a bias, which can happen very quickly, and it's very important for applications like Google Hire. But this is just an example of a specific company. I think if we could have a more generalized set of rules that would be applicable across the industry, which would include, things like making sure that data stays private, or we remove identity from it, de-identify, I think it would be helpful. And I think it could be an interesting driver of, how do we gradually transfer from, the existing economy to a cleaner energy space where, it's coupled, the technology is coupled with smart regulation, and it's very hard to do. Economics is a very complex and economic policy, because as I said, though I do disagree, I think we will see a shift here with AI changing the way people are employed. We need to make sure that, the people who are affected by that are trained to participate in the knowledge economy, but that also, the way they feel will imply what, candidates they vote for, and then what rules or laws are being written by their representatives. So I think it's, as I said, education is everything. It's educating people to do more knowledge-based work, and it's also educating people about the choices of, clean energy, and about, what's good for us as a society, but also helps them as an individual. And I think that's a very difficult formula to figure out.
Well, we've got lots of bright minds around us, so hopefully this is the place where we can take that on. Anyone else want to chip in on that one? Yeah.
So I've got a slightly different comment. One bit of regulation that would be useful for spurring innovation is right now the meters are just this simple thing that gathers data for billing and goes to the utilities. Innovation would happen much faster if they were more like cell phones, where there's a regulated small part in it that does the billing, but then the rest of it you can have apps that are delivering value to the user and unregulated that people can innovate on. Then another comment for how we could use AI more is, again, on the customer side, it's the billing is fairly fixed. If instead you had more of an open market where it's not just the utilities bidding against each other, but also your smart battery could sit there and figure out when the optimum time is to charge and bid for cheaper electricity, that would make it a more open market.
I think maybe not necessarily regulation policy, but I think standards are pretty important. If you're going to create a digital model of a solar farm or a clean energy asset, wind maybe, how does that look? And if we go to hand that data off to a utility or work with them, can they understand that really quickly? I'm sure probably you experienced that big part of machine learning is getting the data ready. A lot of time is spent just put it in the right format. Do we have everything we need? Is there going to be bias in the data set that we're about to provide it? And then, clicking the button to get your model trained is the fun part, but you can also sit back and relax. But a lot of that comes into just getting everything ready to do machine learning and AI. So I think basically on our side as an industry, we can form some standards around what does a good data model look like? Is this something that scales across the industry? If I give this to somebody else, obviously privacy is very important, but if we do that in the correct way, can they understand it and not have to spend a lot of time reformatting or reorganizing it to the way they need to see what they want? So not necessarily policy and regulation, but more standardization, I would say.
Open source everything, right?
Yeah, yeah, no, and that's definitely been really helpful in the machine learning community from these tools like TensorFlow and things where what does it mean to have a model and can I give it to somebody else to run? And those open source projects have enabled that ability of sharing, essentially.
Just
when you hear open source, Pavel, doesn't that scare you?
No, I love it. We use open source. We use Python almost exclusively for all our machine learning projects, TensorFlow as well. So I think one of the things that I wanted to touch upon, so the standards, there is some progress in it from the utility perspective. There is recently has been some, I think, finished work around the outage data that has become publicly available through a very standard data model. And going back to the regulations, I think there is definitely a lot of progress that I see fairly recently with REV in New York and PST in Rhode Island and grid mode in Massachusetts. We didn't get all the smart meters I really wanted, but there's a lot of progress there as well. So I think the regulation is moving. It is.
Cool. So all of you have decided to use your skills and experience in the clean energy business, which is great. But what I've heard is that a lot of people graduating out of MIT and other schools doing AI go to the even cooler things like supposedly autonomous vehicles. But how do you? I don't know how many. Are there any students here studying AI who are thinking about getting into the clean energy industry? Okay, wrong audience. All right, but
Going to do algo trading. That's
that's the other one, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah.
So if they were here, what would you tell people wanting to get into this industry, and what inspired you to get into it?
Well, I think just being able to make things that have huge impact, and when you think about, okay, you can start small, but if you do it right and at scale, that could really change, the way we live our lives and what impact it will have on society and on the planet. So I think that, that's, you can go and do something that will generate a lot of money, but you can also go and do something that will have, a real long-lasting impact.
Yeah, for me, certainly impact. I mean, there's I guess for me, getting involved in the space, it feels like you're working on something bigger, something more important. Again, this is probably preaching to the choir a little bit, but I haven't really seen an industry where you feel like you're really helping make a difference as much. And does the world need another another different chatting application? Does it need another sharing type message? I don't know. Is the best use of machine learning to figure out what filter should be on your image? I don't know, but clean energy is certainly something where you feel that you're affecting the world in a great way. So, and I think there's a little bit of fallacy, and I've thought about this too, where, well, maybe if I go into algo trading, I'll make a lot of money, and then I'll do something good later. And I think that's a little bit of a fallacy. You can start doing good today. So if you're going to use your skills and what you've learned, and maybe you're in aviation or aerospace or whatever, how can you use that to make a better, more greener type future? And you can use a lot of that stuff today, right away. And so, yeah, don't wait. Don't think you can go big, make a big, bucket of money and then help people. That's maybe worked for a few people like Bill Gates maybe or so, but there's other ways to help right away.
So to me, I think the tangible impact is the two words that kind of summarize why I love being in the industry, is because all the work that we do has direct impact on our customers and on the energy and on the clean tech as well. So we have a very good partnership with various universities and institutes. We have a partnership with WPI, MIT right here across the road. The storm damage model that I talked about is actually developed together with them. So and we go actively and work with many universities and colleges in our footprint to make sure that we bring in this talent. And I think once you actually get to the site, we do a lot of stuff like, you get a hard hat and you get to walk around like some real substation, something like this. I think people get really excited when they see this.
For me, it's that you're getting it at the beginning of AI in clean energy. It's not like other industries where the problems are already solved. They're completely unsolved problems, and you'd get to be the first one to figure it out. And then the other thing is, when you're looking at market size, everybody needs energy, and people aren't going to stop needing it, so it's always going to be a business there.
That's cool. Well, this has been a great panel. We're not going to end now, but we're going to transition to questions from the audience. So we've got about 20, 25 minutes for questions from the audience. So Richard, why don't we start with you? Yeah.
If I'm a customer.
So are there mics to go around? Yeah, there's one. If you could go to the mic, that'd be great. Thanks.
Hi. Richard Stubbe, Future Energy Advisors. From a customer perspective, in evaluating whether or not to adopt a machine learning or an artificial intelligence solution to improve your operations or your assets or whatnot, a lot of the claims are, well, if you install this product or service, it's going to improve output by 4% or reduce downtime by 7% or reduce energy consumption by 3% or whatever. The claim, how do you validate the claims amongst all the various parties that are in the marketplace? And or how do you, as a vendor into this marketplace, differentiate your service and in a provable way, because the service that you're providing is in many ways quite intangible. It's it's this code, it's this intelligence behind this black box that's really hard for a customer to assess the quality of it.
So at least one thing we do in our sales process is a proof of concept. So we can, if you're coming to be a new customer rep, I'm sure we can give you a case study. It'll look nice and be on one sheet and easy to read. But the thing we find best is when we say, hey, let's use your data. Let's actually go out to a solar site. Let's collect some images from a drone and really show you, based off what you did and exactly how it would work, does this work for you and does it scale? So I think for us, what we've had to do to prove it to people is that proof of concept phase where we work really with their data. We get them there first by showing them case studies and other people that have done it, but to really close for us, that seems to be pretty useful.
I think data is key. What was that quote? If like God can tell me what to do, everybody else bring data. That's if you have data, then it's an easier conversation, right? Because you can immediately run it through the model. I don't know if your question was more consumer or enterprise, because if you're consumer, then, let's use your data and run it through an existing model. If you're an enterprise and you have enough data, I think that's key. If you want to build an effective neural network, you have to make sure you have enough data, and then you have to go through the process of tagging it and prepping it. But then you can just see it yourself, because everything is open source, TensorFlow. Don't even go to a cloud. Run it in your machine if you have patience and enough compute power, and you'll see whether it does what it's supposed to do, because it's a very easy thing to prove. Statistically, you'll see if it does what it's supposed to do or not.
So that's the second term today I've heard someone mention TensorFlow. So can you just elaborate on that? So obviously there might be some people who want to play around with it.
Yeah, well, it's essentially a library for ML. It's open source. I'll talk about it, but then maybe you can provide some insight, because Google, from a user perspective. So Google open source TensorFlow, and it's essentially like a coding library. It's basically the building blocks for you to build a neural network. You can code it and then run it on your machine or in the cloud. So Google provides basically the entire spectrum of where you want to be as a consumer or an enterprise in the machine learning. You can use TensorFlow. It's completely free, open source. Build your model wherever you want. Or you can go to the other side of the spectrum where we have already trained neural networks that work via APIs, like Google Translate. It's an API, essentially, where you input your piece of data, and it gives you the result after running through the existing neural network. And there's everything in between as well, where we have canned neural networks or AutoML, where you would basically tailor it to what specifically your needs are. So I don't know, guys, like how you see TensorFlow or machine learning APIs.
Yeah, as it might relate to answering Richard's question as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say if you're on the customer side to say, okay, I have some data, let me open up TensorFlow and run it. If you don't know Python that well, it's going to be a little rocky, I think, to start. But there are actually some online visualization type tools that do make it very easy, where you don't have to necessarily know how to code. So yeah, I think, and I think there's a lot of effort to make that easier and easier to show people the power from it. But when I think about it, I mean, a library essentially, if you're familiar with matrix math, tensors are like just the more cool, more abstract version of a matrix. So it basically has a lot of powerful tools to be able to train a model. And then once you have it train it, predict it and change it. And maybe you want it to work this way or that way. So a lot of the things, and the power is also that you can write easier software, maybe in Python, but it's going to run in C++ under the hood. So it's going to be fast. So you can do really powerful things fast using simple code. And it's only getting easier to try out some of these libraries.
Not about TensorFlow, but just wanted to circle back to the question. I think the quote you was looking for is in God we trust, but everyone else must bring data.
That's the quote. I got it.
So I think that is truly the key. You can write or read the most eloquently written white paper that would have a lot of very long hyphenated words about how the algorithms work, but unless you actually give it some data and you prove it, there's no other way that I can see that can be really tangible.
Question there.
Hello. Hi, I'm Fadi Saad, co-founder of Mass Robotics. Thank you very much for the insightful panel. So the issue of regulation and standards came a few times in the discussion, and I mean, having been involved in robotics and AI for the last few years, it's one of the key bottlenecks that we have now. The technology is not really the bottleneck. It's all about the standards, the interoperability, the regulation, all of that. So the question I have is, there is this kind of balance between going after formal regulation and self-regulating as an industry and coming up with interoperability standards. In my previous life, I spent a few years, actually more than that, in the telecommunication industry. And the telecommunication is a very good example of having mature standards and interoperability and all of that. So the question is, where is this balance between going after a formal regulation for these kind of applications that we have been discussing and coming together as an industry and try to self-regulate and come up with the right standards? Thank you.
Anyone want to have a go at that? I know we don't have a lot of policy experts on the panel, so I'll give them that excuse, but anyone want to chip in?
Again, personal opinion, like self-regulate is tough because businesses primarily their incentive is to generate money. So unless it aligns with what they're trying to do, you can't really trust them to make a decision that would optimize that for everybody else. So I think it's good if we have trailblazers and companies that really invest in, self-regulating and then maybe use what those companies are doing and replicate it elsewhere. But I think it's tough. I think there needs to be some oversight, hopefully by somebody competent and knowledgeable. So that's my take.
So I would like to add to that. So I think for the utility industry, it's very different from the rest of the competitive world, and that's I think when because we don't make the money, so we wouldn't make more money if we did something. We cannot make more money than the regulators allow us to, and this is one of the reasons why they exist and why the natural monopolist is there. So the regulation. So I think I'm actually fairly optimistic in that realm because I think that the recent progress that have been made with those initiatives that I've mentioned that are right now ongoing. It's really a dramatic change from what has been before. We really haven't changed as an industry for the past 100 years, probably. So it started somewhere up there in our service territory in the Niagara Mohawk, where Edison was building the first power plants, and for the next almost 100 years went with very, very little change. And then just recently, because the proliferation of the sensors and data and all those things, we really are starting this dramatic avalanche of change. And I think it might be slow compared to the telecom or some other definitely utilities, but I'm optimistic.
Anything to add, Emily?
I was going to say that for privacy and security, that I'd say we definitely need regulation because again, companies will do, Uber, companies like that have already shown us what happens without regulation. But then for data sharing, as Eddie was mentioning, that is going to have to be kind of organically decided within the companies because regulators won't know what makes sense to share.
Thank you. Next question, please.
Hi, Ariel Horowitz from the Mass Clean Energy Center. We think a lot about what the decarbonized economy of the future will look like, and I know this is something that National Grid thinks about a lot as well. All the panelists have talked a lot about AI and machine learning as enabling technologies, but when we think about resource allocation towards decarbonization, we have to be able to ascribe some causality of an emission reduction to a specific measure or something that we're putting resources towards. So I was wondering if the panelists could speak to that a little bit about how do we think about causality of emission reductions, causality of carbon avoidance with this sort of set of toolboxes. Or another way to put it would be what are emission reductions or decarbonization progress, kinds of progress that we can't make without AI or without machine learning?
So I'll give a go from the consumer perspective, or smaller, is that when we install our box, we get an initial few weeks of information before the customer makes any changes, so we can see what their baseline is, and then once we start giving them suggestions of how to reduce their energy usage, then we can say that these things happen because of the AI and what we found.
From a National Grid perspective, I don't think I can put it any more eloquently that paper that I referred to. So I think the pathway 80/50 is really looked into on a lot of scenarios and a lot of ways that how can we get to this and really kind of provided a blueprint. As far as the role of the AI and machine learning in general for this, I think it's going to be hard to decouple it from everything else that needs to happen for us to reach that goal. But it's definitely going to be an enabling source, because a lot of the efficiencies, a lot of the things that we're working on is coming and is being powered by the algorithms that we're putting to use.
Yeah, and for us, we heavily focus on solar, but I would say one thing we do, I think that's pretty interesting in our reports, is that we provide, what type of issue is causing the most amount of, or I guess, estimated most amount of megawatts not being produced because of this issue. So that at least helps technicians and people on the field prioritize. And usually what's not producing the most power equates to the most money not being lost. And because it's solar, that's good, and things to fix right away. So I'd say that's one small thing we do at RaptorMaps to help kind of prioritize some of these issues.
I don't know if I have anything smart to say, but I really liked what Emily said with establishing a baseline and then proving that this change made a difference. I mean, obviously, causality and correlation boils down to a very long debate about climate change, about drug efficiency in pharma, so it's not always trivial to convince people why it's a causality versus correlation. But the force will be with you. We'll try to help at Google and everybody else. I mean, it's all about education and showing things with data that, yes, this is actually causing this, and it's not just a coincidence.
Okay, good segue to the next question. Galen.
So I wanted to first acknowledge the machine learning, artificial intelligence nomenclature rumble that we've been having here. And we actually ran some AI algorithms and determined that more people would show up to an event with artificial intelligence in the title than machine learning. So that's why we use that term. But so the question is, and the question focuses on where different data sets from different sources intersect and the data normalization and privacy challenges therein. And the specific use case I'm thinking of is, we've got data from, and perhaps they have these sensors in Cambridge as well, but in Boston city streets, we know when cars are queuing up at red lights during rush hour, so we can change the sequence and duration of lighting. We know from fast lane data when cars are on the Mass Pike. In fact, now we know what type of vehicle is on the Mass Pike. We know whether it's an EV or not. We've got data from homes, solar and storage production via Sense and other solutions. And at some point, not now, but at some point in the relatively near future, we're going to have to start optimizing that car charging. And that's going to involve combining different data sets from in this case, potentially from the public sector, from the private sector, utilities. So I'm wondering if you could kind of talk about the data normalization and privacy challenges that might have to be addressed to kind of tackle that type of opportunity, or even looking farther to the future, the types of conversations I've had with Tom and Fady at Mass Robotics, what happens when everyone comes home and plugs in their robot, right? The same kind of challenge. So if you could get at that, because I think there's a lot of value there. The Iron Mountain example is essentially one client working with Google. Sense is a relationship between Sense and the homeowner, but what happens when we start combining different data sets and trying to leverage value there?
So the easiest way is to combine different people's data together. That's the easiest way to anonymize. So if, in the case of transportation, if you could anonymize it down to, on aggregate, the people from Andover generally drive in at, 6 a.m. with EVs versus at, 9 a.m. with gas vehicles. So that's going to be the easy thing for privacy. And then as far as getting everybody to agree on the same format, I think you're just going to have to take it, at least right now, on a case-by-case basis until we have standards.
I would agree on so we need standards. Obviously, and open source is a great way to go, where it kind of self-fulfilling. It's like a flywheel, because more people use it. Oh, well, let's just use this. It's an open source. It's free. But I think what I would actually challenge as well on the privacy side, because it's going to be very difficult to both make it impactful, because then you want it on a unit, specific individual level versus a general level. And I have an idea or a suggestion. I don't know if it would work, but if you think about it, like people, basically click consent statements without thinking twice on Facebook or any other, silly app online. I would say that the people who have an electrical vehicle and really care would probably be okay with the consent if we could, again, standardize it and make it general about sharing their specific information, because they'll know that the impact and the value that you're going to be providing is so specific to them that it actually makes it even more valuable. So maybe that's an idea to think about it, instead of obsessing with how do we clean the data. Let's ask the individual if they're okay with signing a consent, so that they release their data. And maybe we have safeguards and standards that we're not going to use the data to drive advertisement, right? Google or something like that.
Yeah, you have to make sure you give the consumer back some value in exchange for them giving you their data, though.
Yeah, I think playing off that, there's a interesting startup in the agriculture space that it's called Farmers Business Network, and essentially the biggest debate topic is, well, how much did I pay for fertilizer or seed or those types of things? And that's information people don't want to talk about. But they create a website where you can upload, and they promise that it'll be anonymized, so that you can then see a chart and say, hey, I paid less than everybody else in my county, or I paid more. What's up with that? So there is some level of, if you give people enough incentive, they actually will share information that, as long as they know it's going to be anonymized, they're then kind of helping them learn some insight about their own business or their own consumer behavior. So I think there's ways that we can figure out, hey, if you want to see necessarily what are all the solar farms in your county or your zip code that have certain issues, do you have the same ones, and compare yourself against that? I think people would consent to that. So there might be some things we can do there.
So I'd like to add, so I think I agree with the aggregation. I think this is how we're looking at it when we're talking especially about the EV charging stations and things. Like, I don't need to know where every single one on which streets are. By zip code is enough for me, and this is how we get this data from Polk, and this is how we look at it, and this is how is one of the things that we can put into the optimization together with the alternate fuel corridors or existing charging stations locations to build out our own network and help in that space. And I felt like the second part of the question was around that the DC, the fast charging and stuff, when we're having those spikes on the network that can be detrimental. One of the things that I saw recently, everybody's probably familiar with the duck curve at this point, but there's evidently a new one, the dinosaur curve, that is caused by has those spikes that are caused by the chargings. Not sure how real it is, but I think one of the potential solutions might be the market, right? So if we go away from the standard rate into the time of use, and we have dynamic markets with a two-way exchange of information, if we can send the prices signals to the cars, that might be one way of looking at it.
That's great. Thank you. Janet, question
Okay,
from
hi.
you.
My name's Janet Besser. I actually lead policy development and advocacy for the Northeast Clean Energy Council. So I have a comment and a question. So the comment is really about the distinction between data access and data privacy. So clearly you want to keep people's data private, but you, from the competitive solution provider's perspective, you want to have access to the data that maybe the utility is holding, so that you can fashion new solutions both for customers and for the utility. And that sort of gets a little bit to my second question, which is really about how do we get deployment of smart meters across New England? We really don't have it. And Pavel, I'm very glad to hear that you are pushing from within National Grid. And I know we're aligned with National Grid in wanting to see that deployed. But as it takes more and more time, my question is are there going to be more companies like Sense that are going to find another way to get the data that lets people manage their homes, or lets me hand over to some company the ability to manage my home or my business or my industrial space, so that I can get the benefits of what a smart meter would provide, and have it paid for in a different way? So I'm just really curious, as it takes longer and longer to get smart meters really deployed in the Northeast, and maybe it's going to happen in Rhode Island sooner than we think, are we going to obviate the need for it? I mean, Angie O'Connor, chair of the DPU, recently talked about Sense as maybe meaning you don't need to have the utilities deploy smart meters.
So one thing I'll say on smart meters is the conventional smart meters, they sample, I think it's every 15 minutes. Yeah, so that's fairly
Very bad, yes.
Yeah, so that's fairly low resolution. We're sampling at gigahertz. And so if you really want these detailed analytics of what's going on in your building, you need much higher data rates. So yes, it'll be good if we get the existing smart meters in, but we're already at the point where we need the next generation of smart meters. From Sense's perspective, we'd love it if it was built into the meter. This is where you get back to the cell phone model, where the meter provides all the hardware, and then just you buy your app that does the data analysis.
So you said you wanted a lot of data, Pavel. So if you have 20 million customers, a million times a second, that's quite a lot of data.
And it will be fantastic. I mean, no question about it, because this data is
like Google to help. Or
You can put it in Google Cloud. That's
one
right.
of the options, absolutely. One of the things that this data is gonna, and maybe back to the question a little bit, I think we need to show value, right? If we're doing this, it cannot be just because I want to have cool smart meter on my house. It needs to show value to the customer. It needs to ultimately lead to the reducing their usage, or lead to the reducing of the bill, and leads to the our overall goal of kind of reducing the carbon impact. So we need to demonstrate value, plain and simple. I think hard task, but we need to do it.
Yeah, I would say if a lot of the homes get solar on the roof and the FAA lets us fly near, Boston, Logan, we can maybe help, figure out power production, at least from the solar side.
I like the economics of the consumers making the decision, because I think in a way, I mean, I'm a trustee in my condo. If I knew that putting a smart meter will save us X amount of dollar that is above the cost of the meter, sure, I'll do it. And I think a lot of people will make that decision as they make those decisions daily around managing their budgets and running their lives. If you can spend an X amount of money to save 2X, then why not?
That's great. Janet, thanks for the question. Thanks for everyone for their questions. We've now reached the end of the Q&A session, so I'd just like to ask everyone to join me in thanking the panel for really great insights into
Thank you.
AI.
Thank you so much.
Great. So now we're going to ask the panel to leave, and we're going to give an opportunity to 4 companies that Galen mentioned at the beginning that are funded by MassCEC along with Raptor Maps, but also sort of pioneering the way that AI can be used in clean tech. So I'd ask, let's just go with the order we have up here. So Stefan Bokamper from Multisensor Scientific, if you'd like to come up. Wherever you'd like to go. Sure. Yeah. Stay here then.
Good morning. Great panel. So at Multisensor, we are commercializing a camera that can make the invisible visible. Specifically, this camera takes color images of gas leaks. So gas leaks are a major issue for climate change, contribute to about 5% or so to climate change from just the energy industry. And they're surprisingly hard to find and to prioritize and to document and to fix. So we are using infrared technology as well as a lot of algorithms and computing to solve this problem. Specifically, we are using machine learning to train our camera to identify different types of backgrounds in the image while the camera is in use. The customer benefit will be touches a lot on what Pavel said earlier. There's, I would say, a general declining level of quality in maintenance operations workers and in upstream and midstream operations, a lot of cost pressures. And so our camera will help basically make finding and fixing leaks cheaper, better, and easier to use. We just closed our Series A funding last week, and we currently have 3 open positions for software engineers, both for machine learning and for general software engineering. So if you know anyone who's interested in clean tech and machine learning or general computing, please send them to our LinkedIn page. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you, Stefan. We've definitely helped to spread the word on that. And we'll go across the top. So Richard Tabors from NewGrid, if you'd like to come. Are you going to go there? Yep.
I can make my 1 minute. NewGrid is a group that was started up out of ARPA-E funding, supported by the Massachusetts Clean Energy Group. We work, up until now, I wouldn't have answered the question, do we do artificial intelligence? The answer is thank you to the panel this morning, because now it turns out by definition we do. But our projects work on, or our software works on the high voltage transmission systems, and our work is to be able to identify switches on the system that can be opened, and when we open those switches, the result is that the cost of running the electric power system goes down, and with that it means that we get cleaner energy being used under those circumstances. So it's a little bit hard to believe, but we've known how to do this for a long time. If we could only identify the switches. And so now, because really of the way we use AI and machine learning, we're now able to identify which switches to open quickly. So we can do it in 1 or 2 minutes, say, if you open that set of switches, you'll reduce the cost by a major amount. So that's the activity of NewGrid.
That's great. Thank you, Richard. Exciting stuff. John, from John Garrity from TagUp.
Thanks, Alistair. Good morning. John Garrity, co-founder, CEO of TagUp. We focus on making the grid more resilient using machine learning. So for example, just next door is Kendall Cogeneration Plant. We worked with them. It's a 256 megawatt cogen plant. They have transformers. These transformers, if they fail, the plant is out of commission, and the lead time to replace these transformers can be as much as 18 months. So it's a lot of lost revenue and a big impact on grid reliability at a transmission distribution level for the same asset type. We use machine learning analogously to health insurance, or life insurance, for assets. So we understand the probability of failure by taking a ton of different sensor data and historical failure records to predict when machines will fail. We do this all with distributed software, and we're hiring for data science and software development as well. So if you know anyone, happy to take referrals. Thanks.
That's great. Thanks, John. And finally, Nathan Post from Windesco.
Hello. So Windesco is operating in the wind energy space with utility-scale wind. Utility-scale wind is now 6% of the U.S. market for power, and about 12% in Europe, with over 250,000 wind turbines operating worldwide. However, each wind turbine on a wind farm operates in its own bubble by itself with its own sensors. What Windesco is doing is enabling the next generation of wind farm technology, where wind farms are acting in a social network, communicating with each other, and optimizing the performance of the wind farm for increased power output and reduced operational expenses. With backing from RWE, which is Germany's largest utility, we have been able to develop solutions that increase wind farm output by 6%. And that is 6% on top of the existing asset without building any new wind turbines. So this is the add-on to wind energy. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Nathan. Well done. Okay, so that's some great insights into some new things happening in AI and clean tech. So appreciate those little startup spotlights. Just want to wrap up today with saying we've got a couple more events left. One this year and then one starting in next year. So coming up soon for members only of NECEC is our annual meeting, December 5th, over in the Seaport at Foley Hoag, where we talk about all the great things that have happened this year, but also what we've got laid out for next year, especially around some of our priorities for policy, but also innovation as well. And then coming up in January, we haven't yet a date for this, but this is our next Emerging Trends series, which will look out for the emails there, which will tell you when it's going to be, where it's going to be, but at least we know that it's going to be about a vision for a clean energy future. So we'll definitely take today's input from what AI can do and build that into that one. So thank you all very much today for the speakers, for Google for hosting us, for MassCEC for sponsoring us, and for everyone for being here. Thank you very much.